I got distemper whether I wanted it or not. There was a man up at Markdale, and he was hunting coons out of season, and he couldn't keep the pelts. So he had somewhere over 100 coon pelts, and he had them in bags, and he brought them to our property and put them in my cold storage. And I was silly enough to put these coon pelts in. I stored them free of charge for him, and some of those coons somewhere along the line had the germ of distemper, and that got in our mink. The mink got sick, and they started to die. And what we did was went to the Ontario Veterinary College at Guelph, and in the first place that was a mistake. We should have stayed home and never made any waves at all. But we did the very best thing that they directed us to do. We were to vaccinate all these mink with a special vaccine in order to stop the disease and prevent any other ones of taking it. Well, mink are vicious little animals. They're wild animals. And each time you grab a mink, you have to wear big mitts, and the mink bites the mitts. So somewhere along the line, there'd be one mink have distemper, he'd bite the mitts, and the next dozen or two that you caught would bite the mitts, and they all got distemper. So we ended up losing over 1,000 mink. We had a terrible loss there in those mink. And we thought we were getting along so beautifully. We had everything paid for, and we had a sizable bank account. Things were going so marvelous for us, but after we got through with that mess of distemper, our bank account was gone, and we had to borrow money to remain in business, and we owed the bank a sizable amount of money, and we were practically bankrupt. We didn't have enough money to cover our obligations at all. But I said to Jean once again, well, if we're going to go broke, we might as well grow properly. So we kept all the ones who didn't raise young ones. We kept every breeding female that we had in the place. And the next year we had a tremendous crop of mink. We raised a beautiful crop of mink, and the price increased so much that in 1 year we replaced the finances that we had lost over the distemper bit. But it was in 1954 that my father died, and it was in 1955 that we got the distemper. And I know he would have felt so badly if he'd have seen us going through that agony of losing everything that we had worked for, but he wasn't there to see that. The family helped so marvelous. The family were always around the mink ranch. I remember the girls, and Paul too, they used to help to put the mink in the crates to ship them, or the dogs. I said mink, I'm sorry, I mean the dogs, the puppies. I would ship them from the railroad train in Ceylon. There used to be a railroad train 4 times a day going through Ceylon, north or south. And I would ship them all out through Western Canada. I had made special crates. They were beautiful crates, all covered with wire and were painted nicely and lithographed on the top. Another registered Great Dane puppy from Spring Hill Kennels. And the train men got so used to seeing those puppies that as soon as they would open the door of the train, they would say, another registered Great Dane puppy from Spring Hill Kennels. I never took a puppy to the station and left it on the platform at any time. I remained there until the puppy went on the train. And in all those puppies that we ever shipped, we never had one casualty. And we got literally hundreds of letters from people who were so pleased with the puppies that they had received. In 1946, we bought our first new car. It was a 1946 Monarch. It was a great big car, a beautiful, fabulous car in those days that had everything on it, 8-cylinder engine and a 118-inch wheelbase. A tremendously big car, and the most useless thing that was ever put on wheels when it got a little bit wet or slippery. You were stuck all the time. You couldn't move anywhere with it. But we did enjoy it. But I kept it for a couple of years, and the man wanted to buy it for cash, so I sold it to him, and I bought a Ford. I bought a smaller car. It just didn't seem that big cars and I ever really did work things out. I prefer something not quite so large. But we got along very well. We decided that we had to have shade around the ranch. There were maple trees and things around, but they were too far from our pens. So I said to Jean, well, why should we plant a lot of shade trees when I could plant fruit trees and maybe have some benefit as well as the shade? So I planted 50 pear trees and about 300 plum trees, and we produced pears. After they got growing, they weren't in very long until they started to produce very well. And the job in the morning in fruit season was to get up and pick the fruit. We tried to pick 40 baskets in the morning. The family would be there in the early fall, and they would help to pick fruit. After they did the watering of the mink, they helped all the time in the ranch. There was not a lazy one among them. They were right in there doing their bit. Then we would pick the fruit, and I would go out, or some of the family would go with me all through the country, and we would try to peddle 40 baskets of fruit. And this went on every day while the plum and the pear season was in business, unless it rained. We also had the farm covered with sheep. I said there's a lot of grass going to waste here. I had to get out of the farming business. We did farm for a little while, but that did not work out at all with the mink business, because every time the farm needed attention, so did the mink, and if the mink needed attention, so did the farm. And I was either running from one to the other and losing out on both counts. So I said, look, this is ridiculous. I can't do this. So we got rid of the farming business. And I rented the property for a while, but then I went into sheep, and we had so many sheep around the place. It was just entertaining to see the little lambs play on the gangway and stuff, to see them in the spring, how they'd play. The family enjoyed the animals so much. Our family continued on, as Jean has said. They went to Spring Hill Public School. They always spoke so nicely of their teachers. They went to Flesherton High School, and they furthered their education. Today they're all teachers. Jean and I did stress education. We seemed to stand behind them 100% in their education. We did never have any work for them to do when they came home from school. If there was homework to do, that's where we wanted them to spend their time. Because I realized that I wanted my family to have the education that neither their mother or I had the privilege of obtaining. Because menial jobs were getting to be less attractive all the time. And without an education in a progressive world, it was going to be difficult for young people. So we stood behind them, and we saw that they went to college and they went to university until they got well equipped to be able to make a living. And today they all have their degrees. Each one of them has special degrees, and they're all in their own field of endeavor, and they're very, very successful in that. Norma Jean, after she got teaching for a little while, she took a holiday in Bermuda, and she met a fine young chap there by the name of Donald V. Smith. I guess once again it was love at first sight, but he was with the United States Air Force, and he had another year to serve with the Air Force, and he finally went to came back, and they moved to Tacoma, Washington, where he spent his final year, and then they came back to Toronto. And Norma Jean was continued to teach there, and Donald went into electronics, and he worked in electronics for quite some time. They built a new house in 1967 in Georgetown, and they sold that a year or so ago, and they built another lovely new home there in the village of Georgetown. Norma is teaching teachers, as Jean had said. She's teaching coordinators, and they, as Jean has said about their two children, Paul and Teresa, beautiful children. We're so proud of them. Paul married, that is their son Paul, married Julie Harris in Kentucky, and he's in business in Kentucky, has a beautiful wife and two little children. And Sharon is living in Vancouver, teaching out there. Paul is a professor in the University of Waterloo, and he's been also appointed a provincial judge on environmental affairs, and he has a lot of responsibilities. I just don't know how he gets around it all, but he seems to enjoy it. They built a new home in Branston, Paul and Kathy. Paul married Kathy Carmichael. She was a daughter of William Carmichael, who was a high school principal in the area there, and they have three boys. Russell, who's in the University of Waterloo, Ryan, who's in high school, and Robbie, who is at home. A lovely family. We're proud of each one of them. Our family is the center of our life now. At our age, we just think they're just so beautiful. But before our family grew up, my mother was alone in Markdale after my father had died. And it was all long-distance telephone calls, and we tried to drive up as often as possible, but we had so much business. So a house came up for sale in Flesherton. Mr. Herb Smith had died, and Mrs. Smith decided to sell the house. So my mother bought the home from Mrs. Smith and moved in. There were 2.5 lots connected with that house, and one and a half of those lots was on the side hill. And my mother was complaining about this grass to cut on this side hill. Nobody could cut it, and there was hawthorns and burdocks and you name it, choke cherries growing there. And she was worrying all the time about having to cut this grass. So I said to her as a joke one day, I said, you can, if you give me that lot, I'll build a house on it. She said, well, you can sure have it, because I want to get rid of it. Well, now, any lot in Flesherton at that time could have been bought for $200, so it wasn't such a big deal, but it was a relief to her. So we went to the lawyer and made out the deed for the property, and the next the next fall I went out and got a bulldozer and leveled the top of the hill off so we would know what area we had to work with. And all winter long, Jean and I spent making plans for a new building, for a new home. We would draw up some plans and then tear up some plans and draw up some plans, and this is the way it went until spring. And we arrived at what we thought would be a comfortable home for ourselves. And we engaged Tom Woods to come and build our house. He came, and him and Les, and they had Frank Taylor and Delbert Alcox helping them, and they built us a lovely house there. We weren't going to put the garage on it, but Tom said, if you're ever going to put a garage on, he said, put it on now so that I can tie it into the house. I won't have to be tearing out bricks later. We didn't have enough money to finish the house because our money was tied up in our mink ranching business. But anyway, we borrowed some money, and we just borrowed some money from my mother, and we put on the garage. Then we rented that house. To John Rayburn for some time, and to a man by the name of Luther Emerson, who was a high school principal for some time. And then we rented it to Murray Juffs. So when Murray left the village, I was explaining to him how sorry I was to see him leave. But I said, you'll be back, and when you do come back to teach in Flesherton again, he had gone to Baden to teach for a couple of years, I said, I will have a house for you to rent. So when finally the school board got in touch with him to see if he would come back, he got in touch with me, and I said, yes, the other principal is leaving, and you can have the house. So we rented the house to Murray and Eleanor, and they lived there for 3 years. And then in 1965, on the 9th of September, I ended up with a heart attack. I fell off a vehicle in the shed with a serious heart attack. We were feeding 1,500 pounds of feed a day. I had employees for years, but this particular year I didn't have employees on the ranch because Paul said to me, if you can do the feeding, Dad, he said, I'll clean all the pens on the weekends, and I could maybe have that money to help with my education. So I said, well, certainly, I'll do the feeding. Well, I was cooking 700 pounds of wheat porridge every day for cereal for the mink, 300 pounds of boiled potatoes every day, and grinding that up with fish and chicken byproducts and meat and whatever we could obtain. And it was just too much work because that had to be handled over and over and over again so many times. So on the 9th of September 1965, I ended up on the flat of my back with a heart attack. Then my wife Jean had to go get me to medication and go and get Bill Hinks, who had helped me off and on over the years, to come and look after the mink until pelting season. Our local doctor, who was not only a doctor but a good friend as well, told me, he said, I might as well tell you straight, your mink ranching days are over, so you might as well prepare to get out of business because you will not survive in this business. You've got too much work and you will not survive. So I took him serious, and we did dispose of the mink. We got rid of the mink in November and December of 1965. But by the time pelting season came, I had lost 26 pounds. I had gone down that much. I was unable to do anything. I was just eating heart pills, and we had so many good friends. Men came and helped us to pelt, and we got rid of the animals. And a man by the name of Mr. Sam Greenspoon from Toronto, who I've dealt with many times, came and bought all the pelts and took them. And when he put those pelts in the back of the car and gave us our check, it was a sizable check, there's no question about it. I went into the house and I sat down and I cried. I didn't know what to do. My business was gone. I was sick. My animals were all gone. I was unable to make a living. I didn't know what to do. I was at my wit's end. I was only 50 years of age. We certainly did not have enough money to retire on. So I contacted a man in Waterloo that I had made a few little investments with over the years, and he immediately phoned me. I wrote to him, and he phoned me right back and wanted me to come over to the office. He had wanted me to go with him as a salesman before that, and I said, oh no, I wouldn't think of it. I've got the best business in the country here. It's paying well, and we're so comfortable here. And he said, you don't have a business at all. He said, it's got you 24 hours a day, and it's going to kill you. He said, I can see it coming. You're getting thinner every day. Well, I guess he could see it, but I couldn't. But anyway, we went over, and I did take on a position as salesman with the investment company. Now, I knew nothing whatsoever about selling anything. I was clean out in left field. I didn't know where to go or what to do. And there were times when I went out to sell something, when I first obtained my license, I would drive a mile down the road and go back home. I wouldn't go on. I didn't have enough nerve. I was sick. I was not able to go in the first place, and I didn't have enough nerve to go and talk to someone. I didn't know what to do. But anyway, as time went on, I began to have some success, and I got to know my business. I had total and complete help and cooperation by the gentleman that had hired me. He was a very, very fine, beautiful gentleman. Bob Cowan was his name. And so I got into the investment business. But I was unable to move away at that particular time because we still had all the equipment. Now, mink ranching equipment is not like farm equipment where you call an auction sale and all the farmers come around and they buy the tractors and the whatever, all kinds of machinery. There was so much equipment there, such as grinders and mixers and motors and bone grinders and pelt pens, mink pens, and equipment that there was practically no market for unless for a specialized business. So it took us 2 years to get rid of that equipment. I went to the feed company, and they were kind enough to give me their list of all the mink ranchers in southern Ontario. So I went and got a lot of sheets printed. Must have got 100 sheets printed listing all this equipment, and I sent it out to the individual ranches. I think I sent out about 40 sheets maybe, and people came and started to buy the equipment. One man came and bought our big grinder. The grinder was big. It was so big that we demonstrated with it one day just to see what we could do. And we put through 1,400 pounds of feed in 7 minutes. So you have an idea that it was not exactly a toy. Now, a machine of that size is not easy to sell. It's just something that it weighed a ton, and it took a truck motor to drive it and all that stuff, so it wasn't something that everybody wanted to buy just as a hobby, so we had to wait until we got a proper buyer to buy it. The bone grinder that we had, we could grind up an entire skeleton out of a cow in less than 10 minutes, and it would just turn those bones into cornflakes. And we utilized all this for feed. We didn't waste one thing. We didn't waste anything. And we had so much of this type of equipment. But we sold equipment from Sarnia to Barrie, and there clean to Peterborough. And I had really more equipment than would be normal, because during the time that I was in business, a lot of smaller ranchers went out of business, and they seemed to contact me, and I would go and buy out the equipment. I would buy hundreds of pens, and I would buy grinders and mixers and motors and stuff like that, and cart them all home in case I required more penning equipment, or in case I would break a grinder or something or other. And I always had a replacement. So this is why I had so much equipment to get rid of. But we were successful. We sold it all out, and then we listed the property for sale. And we weren't very successful for quite some time selling it, but it took a year to sell it. But we finally sold it to some folks by the name of Hughes in Toronto. They came up and bought it, and they moved in. And I was not at all well. We moved into town in 1967. It was 2 years after I quit the mink business before we occupied our house. Mr. and Mrs. Juffs built their own new home, and we moved into the village at that time. But I was not at all well. I was sick. Not only did I not have enough nerve to go out and talk to people, but I wasn't able to talk to them if I did go out. And I was in bed, and our Dr. Robinson said he didn't know what to do for me. The heart medicine did not agree with me, so I wouldn't take that. And I was in hospital and out of hospital, having a lot of difficulty. But after even my chainsaw, I had my chainsaw at home there, and my son-in-law took it down to his place. I wondered why he needed a chainsaw so bad, but we had a lot of trees, and if I'd use that saw to cut up a limb that would fall off, then I'd be sick. And I couldn't cut my lawn. A boy by the name of Art Sills in the community here cut my grass for years. A wonderful boy, just a beautiful little boy. He'd come and cut our grass. But I had to have all that type of stuff done. But I realized afterwards that my son-in-law had my chainsaw down there because him and Jane had cooked up some sort of a deal whereby they get that thing out of there, because every time I used it, I was sick. And, you know, I like to keep things tidy, and I didn't like broken limbs laying around. But after being in bed quite some time in the wintertime, I was not on medication. I was not on medication of any kind. Because at medication, I had such a tender stomach, I'd be ill all the time with medication. So I was just there, and the doctor said he didn't know what to do with me. He said he won't take medication, and got this bad heart thing, and what do we do? Where do we go from here? But my wife took my name over to a prayer train at the church and began to I guess, pray for a return of my health. I don't know what she prayed for. I wasn't even there. But I began to be interested in that type of thing. Now I had joined the United Church in Markdale in November of 1928. I was 13 years of age at the time. We moved to Fleishon. We joined St. John's United Church in Fleishon in 1938. In 1939 I went to the annual meeting, and of course you know it's the old adage, get the new guy, and they put me on the board, and I was on the board for 37 years before I ever got off that board, and I was very sincerely interested in the work. I worked there, put my whole heart and soul into it. But I knew there seemed to be something missing, and I began to pray that the Lord would reveal himself to me in some way that I would understand. And after having this prayer for quite some time, lying in my bed, on the 19th of April, 1977, at 4 o'clock in the morning, Christ appeared to me, standing at the foot of my bed, just as plain as any human being could stand there. He was dressed in the most beautiful garments. They were white, flowing garments. I never realized that Scripture tells us that wherever Christ appeared after his resurrection, that he wore seamless garments. But those garments were seamless. I didn't know that. That was all Dutch to me. I never tell like. But there were big flowing cuffs. They would be 16 inches of a fold down, folded back 6 inches or so. And he was standing there looking at me, looking down in my bed. And I was just lying there, looking directly into the face of Christ. He had the most beautiful expression. He had a fierceness in his eyes. Believe me, Christ can look into the very depths of your soul. But he also had a compassion in those eyes and a magnetic power. I was almost lifting off of that bed. I watched this vision for some time, and I turned in my bed to see if he had sandals on, because I wanted to see the whole thing. I didn't want to be left out on anything. And as I turned in my bed, he began to disappear in a soft white light. And as he was disappearing, I could feel that problem being drawn out of me. I was so afraid. I guess I was afraid of death. I don't know what I was afraid of, but I was so full of fear that I had to get up every night changing my pajamas. They were wringing wet with sweat, but I could feel that fear and something been drawn out of me. And when Christ disappeared, that thing disappeared. And I became so emotional. Jean started to shake me to wake me up, and I said, "Oh, I'm not asleep at all. I'm wide awake. I don't know what has happened, but something has taken place in my life." So I went over to our pastor the next morning. Reverend Wally Lehman was there, and I tried to relate the story to him. It was very, very difficult to relate. I was still so emotional. I don't think I couldn't look at anybody for 2 or 3 days, or I would start to cry. And Wally said, "I think we'd better go into the sanctuary." So we went into the sanctuary and sat down on the front seat, and I made a total commitment of my life to Christ that morning. My life was transformed that morning in a manner that I would never have believed in my wildest dreams or imaginations. I read about these things happening far off somewhere, but never would I have ever believed that something like that could happen to me. I thought I was doing all the right things. I was on the church board. I was doing everything that I knew how to do and doing it conscientiously. But I had not made a commitment of my life to Christ during all those years, and that's what was missing. I didn't know that was what was missing, although my mother tried to instill that into me. But anyway, from that day on, my heart condition was gone. 2 weeks after that, that was the 19th of April, 1977. And 2 weeks or 3 after that, the grass started to grow, and Art had got a job. He couldn't help me. So I went and started the lawnmower. Jean said, "Don't do it, you'll be sick." Well, I didn't get sick. I cut the front lawn, I cut the back lawn, and the next day I cut the bottom lawn. I wasn't long until I got my chainsaw home, and I started chainsawing up wood. My heart condition was all right, and I had no problems that way. I was introduced to something brand new that was very fascinating to me. I was introduced to Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship International. I knew nothing of that organization. I never heard tell of it. But as I began to understand what was going on, I joined that organization immediately. I found out that it was an interdenominational Christian businessmen's association. There's every Christian denomination represented in Full Gospel Businessmen. There's Roman Catholic, there's Anglicans, there's Pentecostals, United Church, Presbyterian, Methodist, you name them, Baptists, they're all in there. All working for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to lift up the name of Christ so that people like me would understand what was going on, something that I didn't understand all those years. I'm still a member of that organization. I'm very fond of Full Gospel, although have no office in it, whatever. I'm not on any committees or executives. At my age, I'm not on committees or executives of any type. But after being introduced to that, I began to wonder if I had been missing something, if someone hadn't been telling me something that I should have known. You've heard of the old story, been so close to the forest that you couldn't see the trees. Well, probably that was my case. I don't know. But I knew I was missing something. I'd been, as I say, a member of the United Church for so many years and everything. We had some marvelous ministers over the years. But there was still something that I didn't understand that was missing. I couldn't put it together until I had this experience and got involved in Full Gospel, and then it all started to come together. At that time, Jean and I, in 1977, 78, began to wonder if there was something maybe that had a little more to offer than we were receiving through our United Church. Not that I had any fault with the United Church. I never had any fault with it in my life, because it was the only church I ever belonged to. My father and mother belonged to it. But we've just began to wonder some of the things that that seemed to be, as I was on the board, I was involved with some of the things that were coming out of the headquarters, and they didn't just seem to stack up to my new interpretation of what I was supposed to be fed. So we were making plans for a little bit of a change, and then there were some issues came along that we were not fond of, and so we decided it was our time to depart. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision in any way, shape, or form. This homosexual issue that came out in the United Church was only one of many issues, and I don't want anyone to ever think that we had any animosity whatsoever towards anyone in our local church, but I did see things taking place in the headquarters that were not in line with the teaching that I had been receiving. So we made our departure. We started to study Bible studies, to go to Bible studies. Even before that, Mrs. Ellen Armstrong conducted Bible studies, a beautiful, beautiful, knowledgeable lady, and her husband John, and our different pastors that instruct us. And believe me, we were eager to learn. We were just all ears. We were just so open to find out what in the world Scripture had to say about a lot of the things. One of the things was a new curriculum that took place several years ago, and Jean got discouraged over that. She said that's something wrong, so she quit teaching Sunday school there. And we made our departure when this issue came up. We were very sorry to have to do that, because this was our life, this was our friends and everything like that. But the Bible says, Jesus said, "Thou shalt put no other gods before me." So we followed that practice, and we tried to do that. We have transferred our membership to the Congregational Church of Canada, and we're enjoying that. We're enjoying that very, very much. We seem to be getting there, what we appreciate so much. We just enjoy it. We enjoyed St. John's United Church as well, but it was just one of those things that it wasn't the local church that the problem was. But we're enjoying our retirement in Flesherton. I still have my business. I go out on it a little bit occasionally, not very much, only if I'm called. But I do get called out quite a little bit to write policies and readjust policies of various different investment and insurance types of business. And we appreciate seeing so many people retire in the village who have lived here all their lives. We appreciate the new people that come into Flesherton that choose to retire here. We appreciate the ones who have gone away to make their livelihood elsewhere and come back to the village to retire. And we think that it's just a beautiful little place to retire. We just wish everyone in this village the same blessing as we've received from the people of this village. We just love it here. I don't think we have any people who are not friends. If we have, we certainly hope that we don't. And in just closing this interview, a little interview, I would like to wish God's blessing and grace on each and every individual that listens to this tape. I just ask God that He will just pour out His blessings, the blessings that can only come from Him and Him alone, and that each one will receive that peace that passeth all understanding, that can only come from knowing the Lord Jesus Christ as our own personal Savior.